Hello, dear students. I would like to apologize. I would like to apologize for the technical problem that we had, but we are back again. Thank you for waiting for us. We'll continue the live session with Professor Sugil Yang with a second question. So, Professor Sugil Yang, the second question is about the role of women in Korean development. So, we have noticed that in many developing states, gender equality in education has not been achieved, but Korea has achieved gender equality in education. So what were the key factors that helped Korea achieve gender equality in education?
Was our discussion on the first question of yours being broadcast already?
Yes.
I see. Okay. Right. Now we discussed the environmental cooperation.
Yes.
But you are now switching to another issue, which is the gender equality or inequality.
Yes.
And you were
asking how Korea, what are the factors that help Korea achieve gender equality in education?
First of all, Korea has achieved gender equality over the time span of more than 3 decades, since the 1980s. Before that, there have been rather serious gender inequalities, much as a result of the Korea's traditional Confucian concept of men's superiority over women, and also, of course, there was the problem of poverty, which limited parents' ability to finance the education of children. And given their concept of men's superiority over women, with a limited budget, parents sent boys to school but kept girls at home. So even by the 1970s, the average schooling of women in Korea remained at the level of completion of primary school education.
Okay.
But as Korea's achieved economic development with rising income, parents became more capable financially to finance the education of their children. And there also have been the women's movement for equal rights with men that began in the 1970s, and that movement was accelerated with the achievement of democratization in the mid 1980s, and with increasing income of people, and with increasing consciousness among the people about the value of gender equality, the government began to take actions in the 1980s and thereafter. And for example, there is a very well-known women's university in Korea known as Ewha Women's University, and in 1981, it launched a course on women's studies, the study of women's status, a study of issues facing women's, and so on. And that
Okay.
was the beginning of public education about the significance of the issue of women's role and gender equalities. And uh, and that accelerated women's uh, movement for toward gender equalities. And there was this spreading of the knowledge, information, and consciousness
Okay.
about the value of gender equality, and that impacted the political agenda, so that gender issue was becoming increasingly important as a
Okay.
political objective of this country.
Okay.
And alongside that, the, uh, the the women's education, higher education, became increasingly recognized as important, and so in that way, uh, the gender gap in terms of education became rapidly closed, so that by the late uh, at the end of last decade,
Yeah.
women's advancement to tertiary education became even higher than men's advancement to the tertiary education. So this gender equality in education has been achieved over more than 3 decades as a result of steady propagation of women's rights movement, alongside the spreading of the general knowledge, information, and consciousness about the importance of gender equality. So it has been a long process. It has been a part of social movement, social progress, as well as political development.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Professor. I think the answer is very clear. Professor, let's take another question on the role of women before going back to environment. Uh, South Korean government has implemented significant policies to achieve gender equality, but some of them, unfortunately, have like failed. For example, the policy that tended to achieve equality in the political sphere. This policy failed, unfortunately. Please, can you give us what may be the reasons why this policy to increase equality in the political sphere and in decision-making positions didn't succeed?
I'm not sure it is right to say that the political empowerment of women has failed in Korea. It's not like that.
Okay.
There has been political empowerment uh, as a process over time. So political participation by women has been improving over the last 20 years. For example, in 1996, there was no women in Korea's National Assembly at all. But but then beginning beginning in the 1996, we had first two women in National Assembly. Now that kept increasing, and as of 2 years ago, that's the last time the election for
Yeah.
the National Assembly was held, and at this time, the number of women in Korea's National Assembly had increased to 51 out of 300. So
Okay.
that compare that, that's how much? What's the percentage of that? Uh, More than two, 10%, right?
Yeah.
But that's a long way compared to 0% in the mid 1960s. So there has been a steady progress in terms of women's participation in politics, but admittedly, there still is a long way to go. Uh, and in terms of achieving gender equality, political participation has been the uh, the slowest area sector in which there has been progress. So there is a long way to go. But this has to do with a number of facts, including the fact that many the voters, citizens, are still have that remnant of that traditional sense about men's superiority over women.
Okay.
It's weakening, but there still remains some.
Mm.
And also, as of the time of the election, in various fields of the society, men are playing the dominant role. And therefore, uh, the voters would tend to, no, actually, more men come forward participating in politics as candidates than women. So that's a inertia from the inertia uh, from from the traditional society.
Okay.
So we are slowly or gradually coming around, overcoming that. But apart from political participation, in terms of holding public offices,
Yes.
uh, uh, and also in the uh, within companies and
Yes.
institutions,
Yeah.
we I think more or less are achieving gender equality. And in the case of the membership of
Mm.
government officials nowadays, at the younger level of officials, there are more women than men joining the public sector. So
Okay.
we have made a very good, rapid progress, especially during the last 15 years or so.
Okay. Mm.
And we are now making a gradual but steady progress in terms of achieving women's participation in politics.
Okay, thank you, Professor. So what we should keep in mind is that even if nowadays the actual situation is not perfect equality in decision-making positions, if we consider the initial situation, there is a lot of progress that has been made. That's what we have to consider.
Yes,
Okay.
basically, I would think that so-called glass ceiling has been broken.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Professor. So, Professor, we'll switch on to environment. We'll take a question on environment, and if we still have time, we will come back on gender issue. So, Professor, the next question about environment is uh, currently, what is the top issue, environmental issue in South Korea? What will be like the priority in terms of environmental issue in Korea, and why do you think it's a priority?
The in the environmental degradation accompanied Korea's rapid industrialization in the earlier years, and environmental degradation was at its worst in the 1970s, when Korea was pursuing the policies to nurture and develop heavy and chemical industries, which are all very energy intensive. But as a result of that, Korean people began to face and suffer from various environmental degradations in terms of quality of water, in terms of the soil erosion and soil degradation, and in terms of the air quality. So, uh, and again, uh, as a result of continuing improvement in income level, and as people faced the increasingly worse environmental degradation, they came to demand environmental protection. So the government began to take actions in the 1980s, and then in the 1990s, especially in 1992, there was held that UN summit on environment and development, adopting three conventions for environmental protection, like on the climate change actions, on biodiversity preservation, and on combating desertification. And that UN initiatives very much impacted Korea's posture toward environment. So in the early 1990s, Korea formally recognized environmental governments very sensitive to local environmental problems, and that in turn made the Korea attack the environmental problems in earnest. That was what happened in the 1990s, and since then there has been remarkable progress, and I believe that basically we have solved most of the environmental problems. But there is one thing that remains as a very serious challenge, which is our high dependence on coal for power generation. And as a result of we have energy dependent industries, and we rely coal is the major source of energy in Korea, and so that Korea continues to emit a large amount of carbon dioxide, and so that makes Korea the seventh largest emitter of carbon dioxide globally, and this is not just a matter of reducing the carbon dioxide emissions as part of the greenhouse gases. The burning of coals also creates this the air pollution, local air pollution, in terms of the fine dust, for example, known as particulate matters. And we also have a lot, about half of particulate matters which are in the Korean atmosphere. Close to half are from China. China is emitting, generating a lot of so do you hear me? Hello? Interrupt this. Hello?
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
okay, hello.
Hello, Professor.
Yes, there is this interruption. Okay.
Okay. Okay, let's continue. We are back.
Okay, you are back. Okay. So I was saying that as a result of uh, depending very much on coal as a source of energy and electricity, you hear me? Do you hear me? Hello? Ivan.
Yes, I can hear you, Professor.
Okay, so should I continue?
Yes.
So I'm saying that Korea, with its dependence industry,
Yes.
we depend very much on coal for the generation of electricity and as a source of other forms of energy. And that coal emits a lot of greenhouse gases, and that makes Korea one of the major contributors to global greenhouse gases, and that's a big challenge. And also, the burning of coal generates pollutants in the atmosphere in the form of what is known as fine dust and particulate matters. And we not only generate fine dust domestically, but close to half of the fine dust in Korean atmosphere originates from Mongolia, which comes through China, and as it passes China, it passes above the many industrial factories, and it picks up a lot of pollutants, and so that is a major source of Korea's air pollution. Half from China and half from domestic sources, and that's the most critical environmental problem we are facing today. According to a projection by the OECD, by 2060, the largest emitters of fine dust or particulate matters would be China, followed by India, followed by Korea.
Okay.
So you see this severity of this air pollution in Korea, and therefore it is very imperative and urgent for Korea to change its energy systems, change the industrial structure to reduce carbon dioxide emissions.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Professor. Let's continue with environment. Still about the same question, but are there some possibilities or some policies that Korea can implement to curb this, to deal with this situation, this challenge, this environmental challenge that we are facing?
Well, as I said, by the way, Korea is implementing a number of exemplary solutions to address many environmental issues, like handling the municipal solid waste, like cleaning up the rivers, and so on.
Yes.
But as I said, reducing the carbon dioxide emissions by burning a coal, it remains as a very serious and difficult challenge. So for that purpose, we have to change the industrial structure toward less energy intensive ones. And we have to substitute coal in electricity generation with other energy sources like wind power and solar power, and even with less polluting natural gas for the time being. And actually, in order to facilitate this energy decarbonization objective, Korea launched a new development strategy by the name of green growth. And the point in green growth is to pursue both environmental protection, including decarbonization of the energy system, and economic growth at the same time. Contrary to the traditional notion that there is conflict between economic growth and environmental protection. And this green growth, Korea's green growth strategy, which now has become a very well-known common international agenda, the point in doing that is to invest in technological innovation in the energy systems and so on. And when you do that, it generates new investment, and new investment means a new source of growth. But we invest in innovation for the purpose of changing cleaning up the energy system away from fossil fuels, especially carbon, to green energy sources. So in that way, we can sort of catch two rabbits at the same time, both economic growth as well as environmental protection, including especially decarbonization of the energy system and the greenhouse gas emission reductions. And for that purpose, Korea has adopted the ultimate goal of reducing Korea's greenhouse gas emissions relative to when we would have no no action at all by 37%, reduction of 37% by year 2030. And that objective will serve as the driver of this greenhouse gas emission reductions, the technological innovation in clean energy technologies, as well as in investment for economic growth.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, professors. So Korea is also taking actions and designing and implementing policies to promote green growth. Thank you, Professor.
There is, however, one difficulty we have to overcome, which is that when we move too fast in trying to decarbonize the energy system, that threatens the international competitiveness of Korean industries. And therefore, we do have a considerable opposition or considerable concerns expressed by the Korea's business community. So in order to make good progress, politically speaking, we have to keep talking to the business sector and work out a solution which would be bold enough for to make progress in decarbonization, at the same time which you would not seriously threaten the competitiveness of the current industries.
Okay, thank you, Professor. At least the good news in that is that Korea knows and acknowledges that there is an environmental problem and they are taking actions. And that's a good thing. And Professor, let's take a last question on environment. Let's this time look at developing countries. Developing countries have less resources, so the first objective, the first goal is economic growth. But at the same time, the international community is telling them, okay, you have also to protect the environment. This meaning that they have new constraints. What do you think? How can developing countries deal with this dilemma, trying to reach economic growth, and at the same time they have new constraints from the international community in terms of environment management?
Okay, I think we are back to the first question that you raised, and it is widely acknowledged, including by the developed countries themselves, that developing countries are very much handicapped in pursuing environmental protection because their income level is much low, and therefore to them economic growth is the overriding priority. And there is also the risk that environmental protection could undermine this effort. And furthermore, even if they would like to pursue environmental protection, that would require financial resources and technology, as well as implementation capability. And so, therefore, in recent years, developed countries have agreed to help developing countries pursue both economic growth and environmental protection under the concept of, and this concept is written into all environmental conventions, which is the concept of common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities. In other words, developing countries would share the common responsibilities with the developed countries, but the seriousness of the responsibilities should be differentiated reflecting the differences in the development level and income level compared to other countries. So that's the concept of common but differentiated responsibilities, and according to respective capabilities. They should not be asked to do too much compared to their capabilities.
Okay.
And so this so-called common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities is the overriding principle for international cooperation for environment between developed and developing countries. And furthermore, in order to, by this concept, developed countries have been creating and offering fund for assistance to developing countries. For example, under this Paris Agreement signed in 2000, that was agreed in 2015 for the purpose of cooperation for the climate change actions to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in particular. There, of course, is written into this concept of the common but differentiated responsibilities, plus the developed countries have offered to create a fund beginning in 2020 in the total amount of $200 billion per year in order to dispense them to developing countries to take their due climate change actions. And they have even created the secretariat to collect the fund and administer the fund under the name of a Green Climate Fund. And that Green Climate Fund is located in Incheon, Songdo, Korea. And so, and with this fund, the developed countries are proposing to offer technologies, the fund, and also assist in terms of helping developing countries build up their implementation capabilities.
Okay, okay. Thank you, Professor. We are drawing near the end of the live session, so we'll take a last question before wrapping up. So this next question is the last one. This question is about gender issues. So, professors, you know, in some countries, because of religion, gender issue is very serious because of religion background. So, how can policymakers can address these gender issues in these conservative countries where the gender issue is based on religion?
That's the toughest question that that can be addressed to me on the issue of gender equalities. Korea, for example, had been ruled by the Confucianism for 500 years until about 100 years ago, and that Confucianism is based on the idea that men are superior to women, and that meant the women's subservience to men throughout Korea's recent history of the past 5 or 6 centuries. And then, since then until now, we have been gradually graduating from that Confucian concept of men's superiority over women. And it took a long time, but it came along with the continuing modernization of the society, as well as continued economic development, which sort of has awakened people, or made the people increasingly more sensitive to economic opportunities, and is including for women. and although and it also brought out the realization that women can make as much big contribution to economic progress as men, and so there has been a education about that, public education, sensitizing people to the issues of gender equalities, and that in turn, as I've said, has helped mainstream gender issues in Korea's political agenda. And once we have that agenda, that leads to the new legislations to implement gender equality. So these legislative measures are very key. But I have, given you this Korean experiences, which is a rather mild case in relative terms about religion sort of dictating gender inequalities. Now, I know that there are other religions in the rest of the world, according to which women are forbidden to be socially active.
Okay.
And I can only say that I cannot see any short-term solution to that, but to reflect upon Korea's experiences of having parted with Confucian bias against women over the time span of 100 years or so. It'll take time for similar things to happen to other religions. It'll take also, it has to be preceded by economic development as well as social modernization. And this is going to be a very gradual process. But then there are always those who are ahead of others, those intellectual or pioneers whose role is to educate the rest of the country people, to educate the political systems, and there should continue to be emergence of such intellectual leaders who would lead the social movement toward greater gender equality. And I don't know if similar situation prevails in your own country, but I trust that if it does, Arnold Tuama, you will be one of such leaders.
Sure, Professor. Based on what I've seen in Korea, how women have contributed to economic growth and development in Korea, I know that women can play a huge and important role in development.
You have to realize that women are workers.
Yes.
So if you allow them to join in the labor market in the same way that males do, then your economic potential doubles.
Yes.
And then they're not just labor force, they're human capital, like intellectuals, political leaders, and so on. And when they join this higher level of social organization, you are doubling the human capital of your countries. So the gender equality is not just a matter of value. It is a value of very practical contributions to the welfare of the society. And so I hope that this understanding will be universally shared around the planet.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Professor, for the insight you have given us about these two topics, environment and gender issue. That was a great time. So we are now at the end of our live session. Please, could you give your concluding remarks to the students?
This both the environmental preservation, without that, the environmental degradation contributes to poverty. Environmental degradation, of course, undermines prosperity because all our economic activities are founded on the natural systems around us. And of course, the environmental integrity is one of the most important critical component to human welfare, for humans, yours and my happiness. And therefore, we have to realize the utmost critical importance of the environment to economic prosperity, the social inclusiveness, and even of the global peace. And we also have to realize that uh, the the human happiness, human dignity, has to be shared by everybody,
Okay.
including, of course, with women. In a way, women are the driving force uh, of the society. Uh, I mean, without women, our civilization cannot continue, as you know, for the obvious reason. And the women are the harmonizing force of our societies, of our families, and they the Korean our market system does not fully recognize this, but in a way, women make more contribution to even to economic prosperity than men, if we consider the value of all the economic activities that women undertake at home, within home. And what they do there is not valued by the market, but the economic value is there as well. And therefore, uh, both gender equalities and the environmental integrity are the foundations of sustainable development to
Okay.
sustain our development. And so this urgency and the importance of those two issues should be duly recognized by all of us, all people, all citizens in our respective societies. And actually, the UN Sustainable Development Agenda for 2030, including 17 Sustainable Development Goals, duly recognize the importance of those two specific goals, and the countries should act accordingly. And so, yes, that's my final message on those two topics that we discussed. And thank you, Toama, for your excellent facilitation.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you for your time. Thank you for all the knowledge you have shared with us. And to students, thank you for joining us, and see you next time.
Okay,
Bye.
thank you. Bye.